We are in the age of the internet. 2024 is about to finish in a few days. And a pertinent question to ask is why study books when we have all the information available at the fingertips of our keyboard or at the fingertips of various different platforms such as YouTube, podcast, chat GPT, and various different platforms. So, what is the relevance of books? Why should we actually still be interested in reading books? And what are the benefits of reading books? These are some of the questions I thought are pertinent for us to revisit because you will see that books do have a very important role to play in developing our knowledge, interest, and importantly, also kind of motivating us to explore things both in terms of the experience and also in understanding the world. Now, let me give you a few reasons of why we should read books. One of the most important aspect is that reading books will help you to extract context and questions. Whenever you are trying to understand anything, you will have to place that particular understanding in a broader context, which means that a Google search would not be able to give you the context of both the question, what you are interested in, or the answer it actually gives you as part of its search. In other words, when you read a book, you actually are kind of embedding a particular information in a slightly broader context, which means that the author would have thought about a particular concept with a larger framework in mind, and she or he is placing that information in the book with respect to the broader context and with respect to the broader question. Now, another important aspect while reading is that all information that you read essentially is in order to address a particular question. More so in non-fiction, but this is also true in reading fiction. Because when you read fiction, you are interested in human stories. In a way, you are trying to understand some part of human kind of experience. And in understanding this human experience, that particular experience is essentially a answer to a question which the author is raising, which means that by reading, one is getting a slightly broader context of a concept and also trying to understand the question in which that particular answer is addressed. So therefore, a book gives you a slightly more broader perspective, which is not possible, let's say, if you just take a book and put it in, let's say, an artificial intelligence machine, which will spit out some particular summary. Summaries are probably good only when you really have some specific information to extract and further build upon. I'm no way actually telling it is not useful, but a book gives you a broader context. It invites you to a world which actually will help you to really imagine, as I'm going to tell you a little while from now. Importantly, a book also has an orientation, and it helps us to know how a given information is connected to other things. So I usually tell about books with an analogy where one can look at books, especially the table of contents, as some kind of a forest, and each section and subsection kind of emulate trees and plants. So if you now open a book, and usually any book generally has a table of content, and that particular table of contents gives you a slightly broader orientation. It gives you the big picture of what are all the concepts and themes that particular book actually is addressing. So therefore, in order to understand this broader context, one will have to actually look at the table of content of the book, the preface of the book, because the preface of the book tells you why the author wrote that particular book. In fact, that is one of my favorite parts of reading any book, because before really getting into the details of that particular book, you will realize what is the motivation behind writing some particular book. And this is very crucial because one can read on a particular book from only an information viewpoint, but it is equally interesting and important to know why that particular book was essentially written, and what was the process of the author writing that particular book. In many cases, you also will learn how that author learned about that particular part of the content, what is turned out to be an important book going forward. So therefore, it gives you an orientation. It tells you that in what direction the author actually is thinking, and generally this gives a good flavor of the topics that are discussed in the book. So it is helping you to analyze the information what is there in the book. It gives you the background information of why that particular book is given, and that is very important for you to understand when you read book. So another important reason why you should read book is that you learn to make arguments. I'm not talking about arguments in terms of, let's say, having a difference of opinion, which is also important and which you actually can have and you can learn. What a book tells you is to actually make an argument, which means that you can bring a part of the evidence and support a particular thought process, either in affirmative or in opposition. So, therefore, a book tells you that how to make an argument by bringing a set of evidence into picture. This is very specific about non-fiction books, including science books, which I'm going to come in a short while. But what is important here is that information processing, the way you actually can take that particular information and present it to an audience and make an argument, is a very, very powerful part of our thought process. That is how we actually think. When we converse with people, generally, if you have observed, we ask questions. Hey, how are you? What are you doing? What do you study? And what are the things which you actually are interested about? In that particular context, the question becomes important. As an answer to that question, you tell something, and the next question or the next argument is, why are you doing that? Which means that there is now a question which has been raised, and you need to answer that. And that answer is generally a kind of reproduced from your thought process in the form of an evidence. For example, if you tell, I'm reading physics, and then somebody will ask, why are you reading physics? You'll say, I'm reading physics in order to, let's say, become an engineer, or I want to become a doctor, or I want to become a scientist, uh, or or even nowadays an entrepreneur or something like that. So therefore, when you actually are trying to come up with an answer, it is helping you to process that information. A book does exactly that. It is in a form, it is one kind of a, a conversation, except that there is only one particular text which actually is making that argument. But as readers, we take that particular argument and we can make a judgment about those arguments. And therefore, it helps us to really process the information in significant details. So, if you really compare this to, let's say, a video, in the video, you have, of course, the picture and also the voice. In an audio, you will generally have the voice, which means that the video is already creating an image and also a voice. Whereas when you read, all you have is the word on the paper, or even for that matter on the screen, and that particular word has to be transformed into an image, and it also has can be transformed into an, a voice, which means that you can actually read a sentence and build your own imagination. And that is one of the crucial elements of reading in general, and specifically about reading a book, because there, the pictures what you are trying to paint in your mind are generated by transferring that particular part of the information which is available on a book, and then putting it into in your mind. And that transformation is very important. That is where actually a lot of learning happens. That is where we convert our information processing from an image which is there in the author's mind, which has been converted into words, and those words get converted into images in our mind and voices in our head. And and that particular conversion process is very, very important. And that is actually the power of reading a book, because it fosters your imagination. This imagination is developed in your mind, and the only information what you have taken is the word, and that word actually is processed in your mind. Whereas a video and audio will actually assist you to create that image and the voice, and therefore some part of the imagination actually is taken away by video and audio. Whereas while reading book, um, that information processing is done by you, by the reader, and that is one of the most powerful aspects of reading a book. Now, what about science books? Science books not only have words, they have equations. If you're, let's say, reading physics, chemistry, mathematics, and they also have a lot of diagrams. Again, in this particular part, what a science book is doing is essentially giving you a particular information in a broader context and defining it in the form of a specific question. And most of the time, this question can be implicit. And it is up to the reader to convert that particular question uh, and try to address and utilize the information which is available in the book. So every aspect of a book is essentially an answer to a question, and you'll have to figure out that question. And by figuring out that question is how you actually develop a knowledge, and that knowledge is based on the connections and the context. And therefore, this is a very important process. In that way, science books assist you to imagine, where it introduces, let's say, a diagram, and it tells you to think in this direction. What you can do with that is take that particular imagination and build upon it. And you actually can take it in any direction which you want. And that's what you do. For example, if you solve a physics problem, or if you are trying to solve a mathematics problem, you actually are given, let's say, a specific diagram. That diagram can be an example for that particular problem. But there is no reason why you cannot take that particular example and build something upon that. You can build knowledge, and that is where the books come in handy. And the most important thing is, all these things can be done at your own pace. This is one of the crucial differences between, let's say, uh, consuming information through books compared to, let's say, a video or an audio. The video and audio are excellent. You can, of course, pause, you can go back and forth, but the continuity, what you actually have, is generally set by the person who is actually creating that video or audio, which means that the normal information what that person is giving you is given at a specific rate. Whereas in book, it is very easy to pause and consume different parts of the information at different pace. For example, some part of the book, you would have seen this generally when you're reading a very complex book, you can actually breeze through some part of the book very easily, whereas some part of the book may need may need more effort for you to really understand a particular concept, a theme, or something like that. Maybe you will have to pause and go and visit some other source, come back and put the information here and try to process it. So therefore, this ability to pause, to go back, and also to go front, you actually can go non-linear, so to speak. So the way you can consume information while reading a book is different from a video or an audio. For example, in audio, it's not very straightforward to actually skip from one place to another place, because you do not know what is that particular context or reference. Because in a book, you can go 2 to 3 pages here and there, especially in a physical book. In ebook also has some disadvantage that way, because you are now stuck to only a paper, only a page on the screen, and you'll not have a spatial dependency of the information which is actually given to you. Whereas a book actually literally gives you a spatial dependence of the information, and that spatial dependence plays a very critical role. Think about it. Sometimes you probably remember a particular concept about a particular topic, what you're reading. In what part of that particular book is that concept there? you can probably have that kind of memory associated with the location of the information in that book. For example, it can be a left side corner on top of that particular page, or right side corner, a figure what you are seeing. There is a spatial dependency of a physical book, and that is quite remarkable, and it is not so straightforward. In fact, this also happens when you're writing. When you write it on paper, not on a screen or something like that, or typing, when you write it, you now have a page, so you can actually take out the page, put it on one side, and you can now write on another page. Now if you write it on a screen, it essentially is coming on a single kind of screen, so it all has the spatial kind of spread in one location. Of course, you may tell, okay, I might spread that particular screen such that I have two pages in one go, but there is a limitation. A screen actually is limited in space. Whereas if you can tear this particular paper, you can put it at one place. The other information can go into the other place. The third one will go here, fourth one, fifth one, sixth one. And that's one of the reason why making notes on paper is so useful, because you actually can take the information and spatially spread them. Once you spatially spread them, you now have a kind of an assisted memory. Whereas this is not very straightforward if you have a device. And for sure, if you have, let's say, a video or an audio, you would be able to hear a particular audio at an instant of time. If you have a video, you can look at that particular video of that video at one instant of time. Of course, you can make a copy and look at it in different ways. But again, there is a limitation on the number of screens. Whereas when you actually take information from a physical book, the pages actually give you a spatial dependency. And this is something which is very subtle. We really don't appreciate, but it has an implication. And there are, of course, a lot of people who are thinking about how this information gets processed, how this information gets transferred, and how we can consume information. So these are very interesting aspects related to reading a book. Reading a book is very joyful too. It's also, low tech, especially the physical book. You can carry it around, and there is not much of stakes associated with that particular book, because you can now take it around. Of course, you might tell, if I'm traveling, I cannot take too many books. But the question is, if you're traveling, should you take all your books? The answer is no. Maybe you can take a few books, one or two, which you really feel is interesting. The other part of the book is that, as I mentioned, you need to pause. It's not about just only reading through the papers. It is your ability to take that information, pause and think about and question what you're reading, and processing it and connecting it. And books themselves actually come in various different genre, either fiction, non-fiction, or something like that. So which means that you would be able to really grasp concept depending upon how you read it. For example, fiction gives you a story, and that gives you an imagination too. That's one of the reasons why people are still interested in reading storybooks. Especially if you look at children, they are so kind of interested in reading storybooks because there is a fostered imagination by converting words into stories in their mind. Even comics does that. Comics actually assist you to get that particular picture in your mind, and it actually builds that story. There again, the imagination is given by that particular picture, the cartoon and other things. So physical books and reading physical books has enormous benefits, psychological benefits. It also actually helps you to go away from the screen. So one of the things I want to do on this particular YouTube channel is also to help you to read books, which means that I need to also discuss more books. So going forward, I'm going to talk about books, especially books which are written in the scientific context, and give its history, its understanding, because there is a lot of history related to the literature of science itself. There are some fabulous papers, and in a different video, I'm going to also talk about why study research papers. Research papers also have equally important relevance, because knowledge at the forefront is generally associated with research papers. A book can also be at the forefront of the knowledge, but in books, you actually represent a slightly broader context of the knowledge. In a research paper, it's a sharp knife. You're really cutting through the knowledge. you're also kind of poking into the cutting edge of the knowledge and pushing the boundaries in a very very specific way. So that is a different topic for a different discussion. But meantime, what I would urge you to do is to pick up a physical book, read it, and enjoy the process of reading, because you will see that it actually is very different from the other formats of consumption of information and content. And this is no way to tell that video audio is not good. In fact, I myself actually create them and also enjoy them. But there is no equivalent of reading a book, because my go-to place to consume information in its depth and also in certain extent the breadth is through books. Then you can actually go ahead and then complement it with videos and audios and other kind of process. So this gives me a reason for inviting all of you to read more books, and hopefully at some point of time uh, we not only will be reading more books, but also we'll be writing more books. And that is also a topic I'm going to talk about writing, especially in the context of writing articles, blogs, and books going forward, which actually helps you to foster and helps you to become a person who is interested in knowledge, not only in generation of knowledge, but also sharing of that knowledge and learning of that knowledge. After all, learning and sharing is central to all human information processing, and books are a great form for doing that particular thing. Bye bye.